Observation 1 is going to be the resolution analysis. Subpoint A is the resolution. The United States federal government should ban the development of transgenic animals. The B is going to be that policy all includes and net benefits is best criterion for this round as allows equal access and the most predictable burdens and methods of replication. Observation 2 is going to be the background. 1 is that a transgenic animal is an animal that contains a gene from a different species. 2 is that medicafish or zeolipes are small fish that live in rice fields, streams, and canals and are native to China, Japan, and Korea. So, the plant text. The United States federal government, through the Food and Drug Administration and the United States Department of Agriculture, will ban the development of transgenic medicafish or rice fish modified with salmon growth hormone. There you are. Alright. Advantage 1, models. A is going to be the uniqueness. 1 is that medicafish are excellent models with organizations and functionality. They have 2 expressing genomes that express at the same time, allowing you to silence one genome without actually killing the organism, which means that it's not harmful to them when we look and do studies on them. The second is that medicafish are also used for toxicology studies for freshwater systems, as well as looking to the toxicologies of other things like carcinogens and tobacco and smoke and those types of things. The third argument here is that wild medicafish are endangered right now. Little a is that the wild population has been on the decline recently. You can see that they were put on the endangered species list in 2005 and they have still been there without an increasing population because their wild population is decreasing. The fourth is that implementation of salmon growth hormone through transgenic research has been what has created this. It's created the Trojan gene syndrome, which means that when we release the medica into the wild, it is causing them to mate and they are selecting genes that are unfavorable for the conditions of the environment, which means that they are dying out and their numbers are starting to decrease. This was a study done by Purdue that identified this issue with Trojan gene syndrome in medicafish. The solvency is that 1, the plant stops transgenic development with these animals, which means that you are going to be able to stop the Trojan gene effect that is currently going on with the increase released into the wild, increasing the Trojan gene effect in the population. The second is that the medicafish are key to toxicology and carcinogen studies. A little a is that they are more efficient than rats and zebrafish, which are 2 of the most efficient ways to study things, which means that we have a way more efficient way to do this with an animal that we don't have to kill. The B is that diversity is key to studies. Having the ability to look at several different species is what allows us to then compare that to humans, which means that having several species to look at is always going to be important to actually getting answers. The impact. 1 is research and development. The little a is that right now, if we're on the road to killing out medica with the transgenic development, which means that we need them to be able to look at carcinogens. Medicafish studies have personally saved thousands of lives from cancer. They specifically look at lymphoma. You can see that when they have the ability to create medicines that will delay the effects of lymphoma and possibly down the road even cure it, is going to be pretty key to be able to fix things, to be able to solve future instances of cancer. Additionally, you can see that medicafish, with the ability to study medicafish, we open the doors for more research and development and to look at further species to create more cures, not only just for cancer but for other diseases, which will allow us to set the precedent of moving forward and continuing the cure of risk of disease. Going on to advantage 2, rice fish. A is going to be the uniqueness. 1, you can cross-apply all of the statistics that medicafish are endangered right now and that the Trojan gene is pushing this even further. The second argument is that medicafish are key to the ecosystem. The little a is that they perform essential roles, especially in rice fields. When they swim around the rice fields, they eat the plants that fall off the rice fields that have pesticides on them and other harmful chemicals, which means that they are essentially cleaning up the waters. This sustains not only them, but also bigger fish that feed on medicafish, which continues the entirety of the ecosystem, and they play an essential role in actually cleaning up the pesticides that are happening. Without the medicafish, the freshwater species would be starting to decline. B is going to be the solvency. 1, plant stops transgenic development, especially with the medicafish, which means that it stops their dying out and allows them to continue to maintain the rice fields and to continue in this population, which means that they have the ability to keep solving back the pesticides. C is going to be the impacts. 1 is ecosystem. A is that without the plan, the release of the fish is going to cause them to die out within 5 years. As per the Purdue study, they showed that their extinction is going to happen, which will only lead to an increased effect to the fish that feed on them being extinct, which means that they're just going to kill out the entire population. The B is that without the fish, the farmers need to add 70% more pesticides and 25% more chemicals to the rice in order to maintain them, because these fish are eating out a lot of the harmful chemicals. They will need to put further pesticides. Additionally, these fish feed on other fish that try to harm the rice plants, which means that they will have to kill off more species just in order to maintain the rice fields. Additional, a little C here is that millions of people rely in specifically these areas China, Korea, and Japan on rice. It's prominent in 17 countries and is a major part of their diet, which means that if the rice fields are destroyed, then there's going to be absolutely no way to feed these people. The little D here is that the collapse of the rice crops will mean a famine when there's absolutely no ability to use these rice crops anymore, and when they are so overdrawn with chemicals, there is going to be no way for people to actually access food. The second impact here, extinction. Well, I hear is that in freshwater ecosystems, 39% of these fish are in danger, which means that a tiny drop in the bucket can set the whole thing awry. The little B is that the animals face 4 to 6 times the risk of extinction. So killing off the baseline of this ecosystem will only serve to destroy the entirety of it. When you destroy the entirety of the fish population, it leads to people additionally not being able to eat fish, especially in island countries like Japan. They rely they rely heavily on fish for their food, which means that you are going to lead not only to the extinction of the animals and the fish, but also the extinction of the human race. Additionally, you can see that the pesticides in the water is only going to cause further contamination, which will lead to global warming that will inevitably kill out everything. Additionally, we would argue that the extinction of a species is just as harmful as the extinction of the human race, so it should be taken just as seriously as any human death impacts.
Absent the extinction story, loss of fish stocks means increased food prices and starvation.
Yeah, and even absent extinction, the loss of the fish stocks means that you're going to have an increase in food prices because there's going to be a higher demand than supply, and you're going to lead to mass starvation in these countries without the ability to actually feed them.
And then the minute.
Yep.
Cool. So, if I'm correct, these are freshwater fish?
Yes.
And how would the U.S. sort of altering its policy affect their ability to change the agriculture of China and Japan?
Okay, so right now the U.S. is doing transgenic development, which is going into these medica fish and then they're being released into these rice fields.
But if they're freshwater fish, do they hop across the Atlantic and then go to China and Japan?
No, we have scientific studies all over the world. Our research isn't solely in the U.S.
So the U.S. research is happening then in foreign countries?
U.S. research has had these fish released into these waters in other areas. Yes, we have close ties with a lot of Asian countries.
Okay, and then my second question is, how are we releasing them if U.S. law makes it illegal to release transgenic animals into the wild?
You mean
Like,
after the plan?
No. So you say these scientists are releasing animals into the wild.
Yes.
That's illegal for congressional law. Why is it happening?
The Purdue study shows that they're being released out. So, how are they doing it?
It's going to be 3 off-pacing order. You'll want the solvency plan paid or whatever.
Everyone good?
Topicality, first ACE points the standards. The first argument is limits. The definition of a word that limits both as basically as allows us to understand the meaning of individual words in the context of resolution, creating a better debate. The B points the definition. Ban the development of transgenic animals means prohibit the act of developing any transgenic animal. Again, ban the development of transgenic animals means prohibiting the act of developing any transgenic animal. The reason for this is that transgenic animals in the resolution is a mass noun indicating our interpretation is grammatically correct. Moreover, the definitions provided are sourced from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Our argument is grammar is the most important way to determine the meanings of words, because it's the only one that both teams have access to before the debate indicates that's the best way to provide predictable and fair grounds for both sides. But the C points the violation. They don't provide a prohibitive act of developing any transgenic animal, just the one medica fish. But the disappoints the voters. Argument is that failing to be topical of Genesis Act test a topic specific ground, which means we can't read the dissats. We probably is they will just shift out the links to our FDA dissat, for example. But the second argument is that it collapses education because it shrinks discussion of the topic down to one minute issue. But the third argument is that failure to be topical, at least the collapse of debate, because if they're not if the affirmative doesn't have to be topical, then nobody even bothers to show up because they can't win. Next is the FDA dissat. This points the uniqueness of FDA operations rely on transgenic animals in the status quo. The first argument is that the FDA has indicated that transgenic animals are safe. In January 2013, the FDA indicated that the quote-unquote Frankenfish or transgenic fish were safe to eat and were not having a devastating effect on the environment. But the second argument is that transgenic animals are used heavily for testing the status quo. For example, we use medica fishes they have identified as models, and they have identified as being safe for the environment when used in that purpose by the FDA. And in the status quo, indicating the FDA is backing the status quo use of these medica fish. But these points that the plan would collapse FDA operations. The first argument is the plan destroys medicine testing. The eighth point is the International Journal of Medical Research and Health Science indicates that these animals are necessary for developing future modeling. But when the FDA doesn't look like they're credible because they can't determine which animals are safe and which ones aren't, the FDA loses the ability to promote this testing from occurring. But the beast points that the animals provide a solution to increase the quality of research. Excuse me. Because animals allow us to test things on animals rather than humans. But the second argument is that's human health research on the whole. For example, scientists have indicated that pharmacies rely on animal testing, or things like drug trials means that new drugs can't make it to market in a world in which the FDA is no longer credible to say that drug tests can be performed because the FDA looks uncredible because they don't know whether this fish is safe or not. The third argument is that it creates regulatory chaos. The plan completely undoes the FDA regulations in 2009. But the fourth argument is that it creates the perception that the FDA will be abolished overall because it eliminates the FDA, or basically overrules the FDA and says the FDA was wrong. It looks like it's creating key tests for safety, but the cease point is the internal link to collapse of the FDA is bad. The first argument is that drug testing is key to healthcare, it's key to providing for better medicine, and moreover, it's key to developing alternatives to antibiotics. Our argument is that absent this development of antibiotics, overuse of antibiotics will continue to occur. It indicates that this leads to extinction because of the spread of diseases such as antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis, etc. that cannot be checked with any drugs because additional testing is not occurring. And the second argument is that applying food standards because of lack of FDA oversight will kill millions due to things like tainted foods of companies cutting corners because they no longer think that there's any oversight. The third argument is that disease outbreak will also kill millions of all still doesn't work. But moreover, this argument is that this is completely turned the affirmative because in a world in which the FDA is no longer able to approve models, those models cannot be used, i.e. Advantage 1, but moreover, it turns back Advantage 2 because a world in which the FDA is no longer able to effectively use oversight. Transgenic animals will just be developed by companies that want to do it anyway because it's profitable, but the FDA won't be able to effectively check them back, which indicates that's much worse for the environment. Next is the counterplan. The unconditional text. The United States federal government, through an act of Congress, should establish a conservation program for the medica/rice fish that sets sustainability quotas for the use of transgenic research and development. Again, the unconditional text, the USFG, through an act of Congress, should establish a conservation program for the medica/rice fish that sets sustainability quotas for the use of transgenic research and development. Here's your copy.
Thank you.
First argument is the competition. The eighth point is the counterplan is net beneficial because the counterplan doesn't link to the FDA disad. Creating a new conservation program wouldn't cause the FDA to lose any kind of credibility. It would just barely be a status quo thing that the U.S. government does to improve conservation. But these points that the permutation would still link to the disad because it still requires overruling the FDA because there's no reason why that would shield. But the first argument is that the counterplan is key to creating conservation, which is key to preventing species from dying out. We've identified that if it's true that they say that these transgenic animals being released to the wild are causing the population to select out the natural ones, that indicates it's probably already too late because they're already out there selecting, indicating the only thing it can solve is further transgenic development via the FDA. It means that the impact of the affirmative is inevitable, but the counterplan can resolve it. But the second argument is the research and development quotas are key to increasing research. Argument is when we identify the goals of these fish need to be around, indicates we can do additional research into transgenic solutions that can prevent them from dying out. But the third argument is the conservation efforts solve for animals being released to the wild because it leads to an increase in oversight of things like that. Additionally, we identify that releasing transgenic animals in the wild is already illegal, which indicates that the only thing that's necessary is probably an increase in oversight. The counterplan is able to resolve that. It means it solves it to the entirety of the affirmative. But the fourth argument is the counterplan solves better for medical research. It allows the continued transgenic modification of these fish in a way that allows for research to be done with them in the status quo, which means it solves back for Advantage 1 better. But the fifth argument is the conservation allows for scientific collaboration in order to solve back for things like rice agriculture. We identify the new conservation movements, open the door to the discussion of threats to rice agriculture, indicates that scientists can get in the game and create better solutions, indicating that it's going to increase the overall stability of the ecosystem because it's no longer going to be developed or reliant on the existence of one fish as it is in the status quo. Go to the case, starting with solvency. First argument, the case doesn't make any sense. They're banning the development of transgenic animal in the US. They're saying the problem is that it's being released in the wild in China. This is a freshwater fish. Releasing it in the wild in the US, it can't get to China because they die in saltwater, right? You'd have to ship these fish live overseas somehow just to release them. No reason this makes any sense. It probably is not happening in the status quo. Or if it is happening, it's probably happening in the US and not affecting China. It means it doesn't actually link to any of the impacts they identified. Go to Advantage 1. The first argument is that the collapse of the metafish is inevitable. Crossed by the analysis and the counterplan indicating it's probably too late. The second argument is that the status quo solves because it's already illegal to release these fish, indicates the status quo regulatory mechanisms are probably sufficient to resolve this question. But the argument is that releases in the United States do not affect the ability to further any models. Their argument is that models can still exist because you can still use transgenic development of these fish in captivity. No reason why they have to continue to be in the wild war for these models to occur, which indicates that the models will still able to happen even in a world where the fish completely dies out in the wild. Even if that's true. But the fourth argument is that the counterplan or the affirmative would remove the ability to enact other gene modifications that could possibly save this fish and prevent them from dying in the status quo. But the fifth argument is that you should have a high level of skepticism. The fifth argument is that other animal models are able to solve back because you can use things like rats and mice to model cancer. They have not identified a single reason why the medica fish is uniquely key for this question. But the next argument is that the only world in which we can have maximum research and diversity is where we have the maximum amount of scientific efforts going towards finding the conservation of these fish. Whether that's for the transgenic development or conservation efforts indicates only the counterplan is able to solve the affirmative. Go to advantage 2. The first argument is that populations are sustainable. There's not that much development of these transgenic animals happening. Think about how many could possibly be released. It's probably only a couple because not that many are being produced in the first place. It indicates that you should have a high level of skepticism towards the impact. It probably indicates that the mass majority of the population of these fish, if they're key to every single rice field in China, that's a huge amount of agriculture going on, a huge amount of fish, probably indicates that the affirmative is just a lie. But the second argument in this term, the increasing application of pesticides is able to resolve because there's increasing pesticide development in status quo by companies like Monsanto. They have not identified a reason why using those pesticides would not be safe, and they have not identified specific pesticides that would kill anything. In any case, that's able to solve back 100% of this question. The third argument is that they have no link to the collapse of the rice fields. Our argument is that the other populations simply fill in. Biodiversity is stable. Moreover, 99% of species since the beginning of time have died out for one reason or other. Indicates biodiversity is stable and it's always able to bounce back. But moreover, the counterplan is able to resolve this question better because we have already identified that conservation mechanisms are more effective. This is especially true if you buy arguments indicating that they're not actually being released in China. Indicates that if they are dying out, what's needed is not banning transgenic animals, which doesn't do anything but rather increasing conservation efforts, and can actually serve to resolve the problem where it actually exists, meaning where the counterplan solves advantage to better.
Okay, starting next time. And in case 2H, which is just going to go straight down. Then the disadvantage. Then the counter. Pretty good? Okay. First argument is we can development of all transgenic animals affecting medica fish. First we need Second is counter-interpretation that banning development of transgenic animals means the banning of individual transgenic animals. Second is the third is that we meet our counter-interpretation that we are banning the development of for medica fish. The fourth argument is counter-strength. Little a is that parametrics. It should be preferable. The little a and the little a in this argument is that this provides for the affirmative flexibility in order to be able to check back negative predictability. If the negative can always predict what we were able to read in the meetings, that we would never be able to have access to the debate because they would only be able to they would never be able to come up with the creative affirmative abilities that this provides for the education around because it encourages creative thinking by limiting us to only one affirmative, there's no way for us to be able to come up with new research into the topic, especially when we have a monthly research that indicates that this would be preferable to our but then allows for the best education. Additionally, the little bit here is that the grammar on this resolution goes both ways. You can say the resolution indicates that we have to ban the development of transgenic animals. This indicates that if we affect multiple transgenic animals, this indicates indications how we affect multiple medical fish who are transgenic animals. Indicates this week the grammar resolution functions both ways. Additionally, they say the limits most limits best little a's that a couple responses to little a's that they are over limiting the resolution to the point which we would only have one affirmative that we would never get to multiple different ways in order to be able to approach this in case of dispute or rejection. Additionally, the little b's that over limiting is worse because it allows for exclude the affirmative ground makes it so there's no mechanism for us to be able to come up with and to be able to respond to any of the argumentation. Additionally, we should prefer additionally competing interpretations of that for the debate that allows for us to have a race to the bottom about which we only have spreading contests to see who can spread out the most standards in the case of why you should prefer a very reasonable interpretation as long as we are banning the development of some transgenic animals. The reasons why you prefer this. Thus, defer to reasonability because it means that as long as we are debatable and we allow for access to ground within the debate, then this shouldn't matter. Additionally, we should prefer additionally provide them ground they could have had all of their disadvantages to why research and development for standard food growth hormone in medical fish is bad. Additionally, how they could have spotlight arguments on how this would ban for other transgenic animals is an indication why there's still a ground. Salty. The first argument that makes that case doesn't make sense because we're releasing it in the United States. The first argument is that we do in things like international research, that we have that the FDA and United States corporations do research abroad as an indication of why banning in the United States would affect these different international studies. Additionally, the second argument is that it's not. The second argument is that it is against the United States law to kill off these medical fish as an indication of how we have to release them somewhere as an indication of why we move them to places like China and Vietnam as an indication of why that's the only natural environment where they can be released means that the firm is still able to release this. Additionally, the fact that we have things like transnational corporations is warned as why the affecting U.S. law would affect those corporations as well means the plan is still able to solve. For the advantage one. The first argument makes that the status quo solves, and the solves because of regulations. You can look to all the analysis that says that regulations are solved within the status quo. You can look to specifically the analysis in the BNC that says from Purdue that says that these fish are going to be extinct within 5 years if absent change, because the fact that we are still releasing the changes to these medical fish and reasons why these regulations are not solved in the status quo. The next argument makes that they can be bred in captivity. That's not how you can develop things like genetic diversity. If you only take a couple of medical fish and breed them in captivity, it means that you lose the genetic diversity that allows for things like effective research studies. It means that breeding in captivity fails. Additionally, the next argument is that they say that we stop other transgenic changes that would save these fish. We are only banning for this specific kind of salmon growth hormone. You can look at the plant text that we handed you indicates that we would still be able to do other things in the future. It means the pyramid doesn't solve this and doesn't resolve this issue. The next argument makes that we can use things like rats and mice to do research. The rats and mice are ineffective. You can look to the fact that not only do they lose things like genetic diversity and long-term studies, in addition to medical fish have the specific genome that allows for you to be able to silence individual genes in order to be able to study how it affects us without killing the animals. Mice aren't able to do that because it's too complex mammal indicates why the science is on our side. Additionally, the next argument, if I can read what this says. They said my handwriting is atrocious. They say that the most scientific evidence is preferable. Thus, conservation programs are best. However, you can look at the analysis that says that just by banning this, we can allow for things like conservation efforts in the future. It's an indication of why this wouldn't provide this teaching. Would provide you a specific indication of specific scientific reasons why medical fish are dying. This has an indication of why you should prefer the affirmative. Advantage two. The first argument makes that populations are sustainable because we're not releasing many. You can look at the fact that not only is this a magnifier effect because of things like the Trojan horse gene that causes the wrong genes to be transmitted into the future, in case that even if we release only a few of the fish and moves further down, it moves further over into the new generations. It means it's a magnifier effect. The next argument makes that we are utilizing pesticides in the status quo. This isn't the argument. The loss of medical fish means the medical fish are keystone species because of the fact that they are a food source for larger fish is an indication of why the collapse of those that ecosystem would be damaging to the overall environment, and we still get access to the starvation arguments. The next argument is that there's no link to the rice field collapse. We don't care about that. Our internal link story is based on the loss of the foods and the fish stocks is an indication of why this argument doesn't matter. Additionally, they say the biodiversity is stable because 99% of animals have died. That's exactly the problem. That the environment is on the break in the status quo means the loss of specific species such as this is an indication of why this would be harmful. Additionally, we're not going for a generic biodiversity scenario. This is providing specific analysis of why the dead fish is key. Additionally, they say that this is happening in China. Once you cross-apply the analysis, it says we have transnational corporations, we do international studies abroad as an indication of why results. Dissent. The first argument is not unique that the FDA is going to lose access to the medical fish in the status quo. You can cross-apply the analysis from the PNC that says that the medical fish is going to be extinct within the next 5 years. This is an indication why they're going to lose that for research and study purposes. Indicates why this is necessary. The key, additionally, the second argument is the term that we provide for medical research studies for medical fish. Notice the fact that the loss of medical fish, especially in the wild, would lose them for studying purposes. It means that we don't need them specifically for research by changing their genome. We can study how they're affected by the overall environment. It means the plan provides for access to this. Additionally, the next argument is termed that we provide for better research. That the medical fish are specifically key for cancer studies. You can look at the PNC where we provide you this analysis. They say that this is going to lead to regulatory chaos. However, they don't provide any warrants as to why this is happening. Clear plan by the United States government probably would resolve any of the regulatory harms, especially when it's one specific action. Additionally, they say that it's going to lead to the perception that the FDA is being removed over all. The Republicans have been trying to take away the EPA and the FDA for a while. These organizations aren't going to waste. An indication of why this argument doesn't matter. Additionally, the next argument is they don't terminate that. They make arguments about how for antibiotic-resistant drugs and studies. However, the Obama executive orders on relating to antibiotic-resistant drugs for antibiotic-resistant things. Reduce the amount of antibiotics that were allowed to be used by farms, which accounts for 90% of antibiotics, is an indication as to why those limitations are going to decrease the prevalence of antibiotic-resistant strains in the status quo, and how this is going to lead to more research. Now means the plans probably provides for better focus on those different forms of research in case of why the plan is going to be able to resolve this. Counting. First argument is that this is super firmable. Firm do both. So you can provide both for the banning of the transgenic development of the medical fish for sample growth hormone and do conservation efforts. There's no reason why these two things are mutually exclusive. Additionally, the next argument is knowing that the permutation is best because it allows for the better focus on medical fish and allows for not only for the development within the wild and be able to create wild systems medical fish, but also provides for better solvency for the case. Additionally, the next argument is going to be no solvency that conservation efforts fail. That the medical fish can move between different environments and ecosystems, and not just provided for individual locations where they're allowed. Is not going to be able to resolve this issue in the next argument. Yeah.
All right, minute of CX. Stand up so I'm not making too much. So let's start on the counterplan. So how is it possible to ban transgenic development of these fish entirely, and also set a quota for how many?
If you look to the plan text that we gave you at PMC, we're banning the transgenic development for sample growth hormones, which would be an indication as to why we can create these conservation efforts and ban this specific kind of releasing.
Okay, let's go to T. So you're talking about limits, reciprocity, etc. So
Sure.
Why is it fair that the negative has to know and research every possible genetic modification in salmon of every possible animal that's currently being modified, and we lose our counterplan disadvantage if we don't? How is that fair?
I mean, I think you still have access to your counterplan disadvantage. Like, we didn't de-link you out of those arguments.
Right, you just said you get the permutation.
However,
how specific the app is.
However, you can look to the fact that we think that just limiting to one affirmative is worse for us because of the fact that means that you can have access to hundreds of different types of argumentation that we would never be able to access this debate.
And this is
We
in the
say-
literature.
Yeah, and this is very much in the literature on access to transgenic animals.
I mean, I think anyone would read what it was and besides all, but I'm not reading it. Let me get my work.
Yeah, sure.
Yours gonna be T, counterplan. What this said. Advantage 1, advantage 2, and then that's solvency page. Alright. No, my mouth isn't. I'll just
On topicality, because then across the we're not going for this offense, there's not a reverse voting issue, and no one in the right mind would want to vote for that anyway. Now the counterplan. They see the permutation, however, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how the counterplan text is written, so I will clarify here. What the counterplan says is that we will create a conservation program whereby we can still allow for the use of transgenic research on animals. However, we allow for there to only be a quota where we keep the fishies safe while also realizing that they have medical potential. This makes the permutation impossible for a couple reasons. The one that obviously makes it mutually exclusive. You cannot completely ban the research on an animal while also allowing for that research to occur, which the counterplan does. But the second is it links to the net benefit of the dissent. We have three links, which links in the permutation or to the thought that these two things could occur together. The first one is the abolish link. They conceded in the MG that the plan is perceived as the abolishment of the use of future transgenic animals within research. The words of this argument is that the FDA has put the complete credibility of their scientific research on the ability to allow precisely for things like fish testing, to allow for there to be scientific research and innovation in the future. The plan is perceived as a Republican right-wing attack upon the ability for the FDA to create one of the basic functions that it was developed to do. The second link is testing. They have not adequately answered the argument about how pharma perceives the plan. It sent across the word from the RLC, which indicates that pharma would perceive this as an attack on their ability to do drug testing and in the future. Think about it. The only way in which pharmacological tests are able to occur is the fact that we're able to implant human traits upon animals so that we can model the ability to see, look, the Macanda fish does not naturally have a human cancer, but when we're able to input it, we can then see how that strain is used in the future. But the C-splice momentum, the plan is seen as creating a spillover. That's all we need to defeat that permutation. But the third is that the permutation severs ban as portion of the plan text. Remember, the plan text calls for the complete ban. Severs is bad for a couple reasons. The A-splice that creates the affirmative is a moving target. The affirmative is able to say we didn't really mean we intended to ban, but rather that the Aff banned the complete use of research and then set a quota. This is equivalent to saying that the affirmative should completely ban the use of popcorn except for that really good cheddar type that we all love. It's completely nonsensical and creates a complete burden, makes the MOC impossible. Now, unfortunately, there's no offense against the counterplan. The only argument that is said is that these fishes are good for research. The counterplan agrees that is not a dissent to our strategy. There are 4 reasons why we are good for that research. We have conservation efforts which prevent them from dying out, LOC number 1. We spur future research and development, which is critical to pharma, in LOC number 2. But the third is that we allow for oversight and release, which prevents them from dying and killing rice fields in China and Japan. But fourth is that we allow for scientific collaboration. Only when we can actually use these animals in transgenic research are we allowed to be able to model the future by which they are used. Now, the only answer in the PMR is going to be genetic diversity. A couple reasons why we answer genetic diversity better. The first is that genetic diversity can only be solved by a conservation program. Remember, in the status quo, the fish are not protected according to the PMC, which means that their genetic diversity is going to be extinct inevitably. Just banning the use of research and development does not solve for genetic diversity for 3 reasons. The one is that when the public no longer uses transgenic research, it would be deferred to private uses, and that is worse. For example, if the United States no longer has regulatory authority, that leads there to be private companies in China and Japan who will inevitably use this research in the future. Lack of a U.S. author means that it only gets traded off to another country, and you essentially export the ability for death to occur elsewhere. Also, we will stop the release, which solves the entirety of Advantage 1 and Advantage 2. Now that this ends. The only uniqueness argument is actually not an argument that answers our uniqueness claims. Look, the thesis of the dissent is that currently in status quo, the FDA uses these processes for the purpose of all their operations. However, the MG number 1 is that extinction of these animals is coming in the status quo that is not relevant to a question about what the FDA credibility is in the status quo 2 arguments. Even if their extinction is coming, the FDA is still credible with the ace point that they've developed. Transgenic animals is being safe to eat, but the second is that testing is occurring in the status quo. The third is that we solve your extinction argument. The counterplan would obviously provide uniqueness by allowing for there to be a conservation effort. Now, the link debate, the one is that you are bad science, and there are 3 reasons why we are true. The ace points that you destroyed medicine test. The LOC number 1 is just completely conceded. They attempt to say that modeling is better in the future, but you do not allow for modeling to legally occur because you prohibit or substantially deter the ability for people to want to do it. But the second is research. The LOC number 2 indicates that the quality of research is critical. Only when we can have contained environments where we are able to actually have transgenic research are we able to model the genetic diversity. Genetic diversity does not randomly happen, but must be carefully cultivated. Think about corn. Corn is not naturally genetically diverse and died off in the Midwest throughout the entirety of the era before science. However, it was only after genetic modification created new brands of corn that it was able to be cultivated for the purpose of human consumption, which is why corn is so much fatter than it was before when it just looked like a weed. But the third argument is pharma. Pharma would substantially perceive this as an attack upon the industry because the Macanda fish is critical to rice and agriculture, which you indicate is critical to the economy, so it means that they perceive their profit margin is completely deterring. Now, the second is extend across the spillover link from the counterplan debate. Extend across that they are perceived as abolishing, and that it will be perceived that this would happen against other animals. Now, the argument that the MG makes is that Obama has ex-owed an antibiotic order. However, 2 argument that policy depends on animals. You can now create antibiotic resistance without the ability to create research and develop on animals, but the second is that the perception of the plant destroys that by an executive order only further increases antibiotic resistance, and also we don't have to win that impact. You have conceded the food standards internally extend across the LC number 2 that you cause food standards and dramatically increases the result of companies feeling that they can now become increasingly belligerent on the context of their food production. The impact is immediate and tangible. Millions of people die as a result of food states. It increases massive poverty that becomes a cyclical impact as people are unable to afford the basic nutritional values. Now advantage 1. The counterplan solves the only MG word that you hear is conservation, but we solve this better for a couple of reasons. The one is that we maintain genetic diversity, extend that from the counterplan, but also now the plan does not solve for genetic diversity or conservation. The one is that a ban does not solve for other uses. For example, this fish could then be used as for people to eat after we no longer allow for transgenic deployment, but the second is that they would just become pets and not allow for genetic diversity, but the second is only conservation is key, and the third is that collaboration is able to solve for science. Now, a ban does not lead to conservation. Do not allow the Aff to claim that banning these animals leads to a conservation program. 3 arguments. The one is that no, it would lead to private use. Private pharmaceutical companies and private uses will now allow for there to be massive profit rates because they see the United States is no longer in the game. But second, this causes foreign countries to jump on board and create even worse. For example, in the countries that use sites such as China, there are now adequate environmental regulations, nor are there animal protections, which means that the Macanda fish should just be further exploited and decrease the genetic diversity. But the third argument is that there is no law that is passed versus planned. You don't cite a bill in Congress or anyone who would vote afterward, which means fiat only means that the Aff gets the ban now. And advantage 2. The MG just sort of repeats the argument that the Macanda is a keystone species. We agree. We don't contest this argument, but the counterplan solves the public conservation efforts and research and development is better for that species. 4 reasons. 1 is pharma. Pharma would take over and use it to do abusive claims. But second is that private uses such as overfishing would be rampant. But the third argument here is that foreign governments would allow for that. These are answers that apply here as well because the MG makes the same arguments. Only we solve for biodiversity. Now it solves the debate. There are alternative causes to release in the United States. The one is that, for example, China or Japanese pharmaceutical companies can allow for there to be the release of transgenic animals, or the private uses only conservation solves. They have conceded the argument that Japan and China get on board once the United States creates these conservation efforts. Regardless of the truth or what you think of that claim, there's a conceded warrant as to why there would be momentum. They have a monetary incentive to allow for quotas because transgenic animal research is critical to China and Japan. They all have food. They have Food and Drug Administrations, particularly with China and Japan, who are resource trapped, need to do testing because they don't have natural alternatives. The US might be able to do free-range chicken. They cannot do the same.
It's an overview. Then it's counterplan. Actually, overview just had counterplan, solvency, advantage 1, advantage 2.
Overview, just had counterplan.
Solvency, advantage 1, advantage 2. So half an order. Anyone not ready? This debate is about grade school offense and defense. They have conceded that counterplan solves the entirety of the affirmative because they get there with about 5 seconds left in the MG. They have conceded the permutation would link to the FDA dissent. Moreover, they have not read offense against the FDA dissent. They have attempted to mitigate it, but if we win even a risk of the dissent, that's still enough to pull the trigger for the negatives. In other words, they're conceding the counterplan solves the affirmative and there is no offense against the counterplan. It's open and shut. Go to the dissent. Josh is just right. The uniqueness answers are the wrong question. We are saying that the FDA's credibility is high in status quo because of its promotion of transgenic animals, but the FDA has bet the farm on the development of these animals, the development of foodstuffs by adding the salmon growth hormone to these animals, etc. The FDA has said this is safe, this is what we want to use, this is the way forward going into the future. The FDA doesn't have any wiggle room on this question. It has conceded, but moreover, you can extend across the link arguments. They don't functionally answer that the claim collapses FDA ops, not because it actually gets rid of the FDA, but because it makes the FDA look credible and irrelevant so no one gives a shit what they have to say anymore. You can extend across the argument indicating this, especially the perceptual argument that's just not answered. In a world of the affirmative, it's perceived that the FDA is going to pull further approval for other transgenic animals, and it's perceived that the FDA is getting absolutely rolled by the USFG in Congress, and it's perceived that the FDA is losing all of its relevance. That means the FDA is no longer able to functionally approve other animals for these tests. It turns the modeling advantage because it means that we're no longer able to engage in animal modeling when the FDA is no longer able to approve testing and be seen as credible by scientific organizations. limitations, but moreover, roles advantage too, is a world in which the FDA is no longer there for oversight. Companies massively abuse this. This is the argument that Josh is making up and down the case flow. The world absent the FDA is much worse for conservation in the environment. All these arguments are conceded because the MG only answers this as if it's an FDA or as if it's about the existence of the FDA. You can also extend across the impacts, indicating that the FDA is key to drug testing related to healthcare. As well as the arguments indicating that food standards decline and kill millions. These arguments go functionally conceded, and they're enough to outweigh the affirmative, especially in the context of the affirmative, or the counterclaim being able to solve the affirmative. That means that when you're stacking the impacts at the end of the day, both the counterclaim and the plan access the affirmative, but the counterclaim has the net benefit of the disstat, avoids the killing of those millions. That means we're ahead on magnitude as well as time frame, because it happens in the near future as soon as food standards decline, and the FDA is no longer seen as credible and no one wants to listen to them. Let's go to the counterclaim. They have conceded all the solvency arguments, indicating the counterclaim solves the entirety of the affirmative. First, you extend across the permutation is still linked to the dissat. The permutation is still perceived as abolishment, the permutation is still perceived as an attack on drug testing, and it's still perceived the permutation will spill over to other types of transgenic animals. 3 reasons that are conceded in the MG, indicating that the permutation would not be preferable because the permutation was still linked to the dissat. There's no difference or analysis done. But you can also extend the solvency arguments. You can extend across conservation is able to solve these fish, but the most important argument that I want you to extend is the number 3 argument, indicating that there's an increase in oversight in the world of conservation. The counterclaim results in the affirmative. More effective oversight means these animals no longer get released, means the counterclaim is the internal link to resolving 100% of the affirmative. No possibility of a solvency deficit they can go for, means the dissat is the tiebreaker, you vote nay. Go to the solvency page. This is the argument you need up and down the plan flow. It's the reason why the counterclaim solves better than the Aff. They say that transnational corporations are engaging in these experiments with China and Japan, etc. You think China and Japan are going to listen just because the FDA bans the development of something they're using on a massive scale for development of foodstuffs? Absolutely not. China has a terrible record of listening to its own regulatory standards, much less those of a foreign country. This is a ludicrous argument, means that there is a very low chance of the affirmative actually solving. Rather, it just exports the problem overseas as China and Japan continue to do development, but the FDA doesn't even have a say in the matter, isn't even attempting to have a say in the matter, because the FDA has just checked out and said it's banned, indicates the problem probably gets much worse. However, the counterclaim doesn't link to this, because they've also conceded arguments indicating that China and Japan are going to get on board in the world conservation effort because they have a material incentive to do so. They want to preserve this fish as well so they can save their rice crop. Indicates only the counterclaim is able to solve the affirmative is not able to solve. Crossbow that to advantage 1 and advantage 2. That's the only argument we need at the end of the debate. Other countries and other corporations will not listen to the FDA unless they have a material incentive to do so because the FDA is helping to save their crops.
Flex time?
Yep.
There you go.
Just to be really clear, is pharma going to be hurt by this, or are they going to completely take over? Because you make both claims.
So, in the United States, where pharma is controlled by the FDA and has to get the FDA to approve these animals, etc. for testing, it will be crushed. Overseas, like China and Japan, outside of the FDA's regulatory reach, those companies are probably just going to continue doing this, but worse because the FDA doesn't even have a say in the matter.
Okay. So, it is going to be the counterclaim, and then the disadvantage, and then that case. Overview first. For the negative, there was one way out, and it was topicality. They kicked it, which means that when you have a non-competitive counterclaim, you're always going to be voting for the Aff. Go to the perm now. Look to your plan text. So you can see the fact that we ban this only with the medical fish, which means that you can, with the standard growth hormone, the specific wording in this text means that there's absolutely no ban for the entirety of the future. It leaves it open to interpretation, so in the future there will be other ways for them to be using transgenic animals. And the current way that we functionally do this is the only transgenic way that, this is the only way that they're modifying it, which means that it is a ban right now, but it is not a ban for all of eternity and all of the future, which means that you have a completely non-competitive perm. You can look to the fact that conservation efforts are not exactly mutually exclusive with the plant text. We can still use conservation efforts with medical fish, which means that the perm is always going to be standing. They don't read you any specific reasons why this actually isn't going to work. They say that it's mutually exclusive because you can't completely ban, but the problem is that the plant text isn't a complete ban, which means that there is absolutely no mutually that we wrote it down and that it says that right there. Additionally, you can see the fact that conservation efforts are always going to be allowed, which are always going to be allowed despite the type of research that we're doing, which means that there's absolutely no mutual exclusivity here, and the perm takes out the entirety of your counter plan. Additionally, you say that this links to the DA because you abolish it in the future and that you abolish the DA or the FDA. Okay, first off, you can cross-apply Corey's answers that the FDA is not going anywhere and that it's completely stable, that the right wing has been attacking them for a long time, which means that all of your right wing attacks are completely non-unique. They have been attacking them, which means that the FDA has been a stable organization and it's not going to just like disappear overnight. Yes.
That's not the argument. The argument is that it's going to be perceived as banning all transgenic animals.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the argument is that it's going to be perceived as banning all transgenic animals. I'm pretty sure that they're not going to make a massive flub like that. The FDA is not going to release that they're banning all transgenic animals when they're only doing it for one specific fish. They know the type of blowback that banning all would have, which means that they're going to be very careful with releasing that they're only doing it to one. There's not going to be some huge misconception and misperceiving of this as they're banning all of them, which means that all of your impacts aren't actually going to happen and the DA doesn't actually work throughout your link story, which means that that's not going to be working. Additionally, you can look to the fact that this looks for a win for pharma. The fact that they are not going to be able to test medical fish in 5 years is a huge loss for them because the medical fish are going to be dying out, which means that they can't sell back for the thousands of cancer patients that they are trying to do right now, which means that the only way to help big pharma is to actually keep these fish alive. That way they have the ability to test. So you saying that it looks like you're hurting testing is not true whatsoever. The app only facilitates testing by keeping a fish in the water, which means that they're going to be able to continue testing. So there's absolutely no link here. Additionally, you say that there's going to be momentum, but we argue that doing it for a hyper-specific reason is going to lead to absolutely no momentum. Additionally, when you have the ability to genetically develop in the future, it means that there is absolutely no reason why there would be momentum. They are only going to be using this law as a malleable way to jump off from the future, which means that the momentum is only going to be shifting towards transgenic and not away from it. Additionally, they say that the perm severs, but there's absolutely no severance here. We do not sever out of any part of our plant text. We use the entirety of it. You can look to the perm text that specifically do both. When you read through it, there's no severance out of either of the plant text or the counter plant text.
They say moving target, however, this is what we defend the target.
Yeah, they say moving target, but I'm pretty sure you can look to the copy that we handed you that shows that we're defending this specific plain text the entirety of the way through the debate. Additionally, they say there's no offense against the counterplan. You can extend across all of Corey's arguments that conservation efforts are bad because it leaves the fish in the water, which means that they're still dumping and they're still killing each other off. Moving on to the dissect. Really, the one argument that we need here is the one argument that they concede. The fact that the FDA isn't going to be going anywhere because they've been attacked for the entirety of their existence, but there has never been any move away from them, and there's going to be absolutely no reason why this is going to go away. Additionally, you can extend across the fact that this looks like a win for pharma, which means that there's going to be no perception issues. Additionally, you can extend across the turn that they drop, saying that this provides better research and studying the environment down the road, which means that we get access to all of your impacts when they can see the fact that this is going to lead to the ability for more research. They can see the entirety of their impacts. Additionally, they say that there's going to be the food standards issue. We say that the FDA is going to be just fine. The killer concession here is the fact that the FDA is not going anywhere. If the FDA can't do it now, they're not going to be able to do it later, which means that there's absolutely no change. They don't give you any brink scenario for why the FDA is going to collapse. Additionally, they don't give you any brink scenario for why all of a sudden the FDA is going to become ineffective. If it's effective now, it's going to be effective later. They are not giving you the links that you need. They are not telling you why the plan is going to push this over. We would argue that the use of one fish in one specific scenario is never going to cause a collapse of an entire organization that's been around for years. This is absolutely asinine and never going to happen. Going on to Advantage 1. You can extend across that we need diversity to do this. They say that they're going to be able to maintain diversity, but the only way to do this is to not kill us off. They concede a lot of the advantage here, which means that you can extend this across, that keeping them in the environment is only going to allow for further medical research, which is going to solve for thousands of cancer patients' deaths. This is the only impact that is being accessed in the surrounding, and it's the biggest one because it's happening now, and it will only continue with the plan.
My voice is coming and going at will the last week and a half. I don't know why. Maybe it doesn't want school starting yet.
Can't blame it.
Yeah. So apologies if I'm scratchy. Okay. The value and effort of the PMR. I think the long and short of it is that a lot of this explanation is newish. And so, for example, yeah, like it might be a little bit of a stretch, this credibility argument. The arguments that they're making before the PMR are better developed, and you're behind on them, right? So just to say, well, this one issue would be quite a stretch for them to collapse on. I mean, maybe, but that needed to have some more arguments behind it and be developed. Right? So I think that's kind of a problem. I mean, I think you did what you needed to do on T, but I think essentially you had a time trade-off on T and just didn't have so they made the strategic decision. I understood the counter plan from the get-go to include conservation for the fish you were talking about. So in that case, the perm, doesn't really work. I think the EPA wouldn't fall because it's under attack. I mean, the FDA because it's under attack. The general area is under attack all the time. Yeah, that's good. Probably you need more development, more time. Try to leverage as much as you could with PMR. It was the right thing to do. I think I have it. I think that's the long and short of it. You're behind on this.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.